Hi guys, and welcome back to another tutorial. Today I'm going to show you how to draw eyes. So last time we drew faces and I said we would be covering all the features of the face. So this time I'm going to do eyes, and then moving forward we'll do the other parts. So you can let me know in the comments which you're most interested in seeing first. So we'll maybe do ears or mouth or the nose, and then we'll move forward. Otherwise, you can see I've got two light circles on my page, and we're going to use those, and we're going to shade them as spheres because we're going to think about the eyeball underneath, the eyelids and underneath your skin. That'll really help to give a roundness and a solidity to the eye while we're working on it. So the first two are purely conceptual. They look kind of terrible, and the point isn't for them to look realistic or cool. It's so that you can get an understanding of how the eye is shaped. First off is the shape of the eyelids covering your eye. It's not a symmetrical or oval shape, it's more like a parallelogram, and the bottom inner corner is higher than the outer corner, and then those corners meet your eyeball and form the tear ducts, and then the eyelids go over that. Usually, depending on the angle, you might see it in different shapes. So if you're looking from the bottom up at an eye, the eyelids are going to poke out a lot more as well. So we'll start with this circle. So I've drawn the guidelines and given you an idea of its roundness. And then we're going to add in first just the iris and the pupil, just so we have an idea of where exactly the eyeball is looking. So yeah, it's essentially looking straight at you. Do you feel intimidated? On a side note, if you are enjoying the video so far and you have not yet subscribed, be sure to subscribe for more content and leave a like below if you find the video useful as well. So the next thing I'm going to do is just add in some tone and variation so you can get a bit of an understanding of where to shade. We would choose the light angle, it's from the top right and pointing down, and we're going to shade the eyeball in the opposite direction or on the opposite end of that. So the core shadow, you won't really pay attention to the core shadow for this because it's going to be covered mostly by eyelids and all the fleshy bits. So we'll start with the eyelid again. The inner eyelid is lower than the outer edge, and we're going to draw that so the eyeball kind of meets where the tear duct starts. Okay, I'm just drawing the eyelids around the same area that the eyeball starts to recede and reaches edge. That's just for conceptual purposes. Later on we're going to do a really realistic eye, and I'll show you all the things that we can add in using what we've learned throughout this tutorial. Right, so I made a few mistakes. Again, I always say mistakes are how you learn and how you improve, so make as many mistakes as you can and fail upwards. Reshaping the iris, the eyelids, and just the whole general shape of the eye, and then we can move forward. Alright, so now we're going to add in the socket of the eye and take that into consideration. So I've added in the brow ridge, and then we'll add in the lower eye socket where the cheekbones come in as well, and then we're going to think about the light. I've divided the eye into three areas, and those three are going to represent the faces of the eyelids and the eye overall that are pointing to or away from the light. So again, the light faces, or the faces of this form that are pointing the furthest away from the light are going to obviously be the darkest. When you're drawing, it's always good to think of what you're drawing in terms of form and shape and faces and edges. So you might get what you call shadow shapes, and that would be, well, quite simply put, the shapes that the shadows form depending on how the light hits them. In these shadow shapes, if you want to be stylistic, you can leave out the inner details and you can make it one gradual area, kind of like high contrasting or low contrasting of different light tones. One other thing to consider when shading the brow ridge is that it's not usually a sharp single plane. Near the edge of the brow, where the eyelids meet the outer socket of your eye and your eyebrow meets the outer socket, it pokes out, and that's where you'll see highlights. It's especially prevalent in women's eyes. Some men have really strong brow ridges and eyebrows and they cover their entire eyes, but usually with women the outer edge is quite highlighted and it's facing towards the angle of light. Well, if the angle of light is upwards. I posted a video recently this week as well with Last of Us Clicker, so you should definitely go check that out as well. I'm going to be trying to draw 2 videos a week, every week from now on, and it'll be 1 tutorial, 1 speed drawing. So you get the best of both worlds in each week, and we'll work on that and building up in frequency as we go. But for now, I'm just focusing on these eyes. As you can see now, I'm starting to add in that edge of the lower eyelid. Adding that in always helps to make the eye feel a little bit more realistic and considered. And you'll see that the top eyelid has a thicker line, and that represents more the shadow of the eyelid falling over the eye. So when it comes to shading, we're not going to press hard to get one dark tone, but you're going to layer over, and you can go back to the same area a couple of times. One important thing with the iris and the pupil is the edges of the iris aren't hard. They're not solid lines, they're quite blurry actually. I'm going to go back and add in a bit more depth and tone by going over those areas where the light is furthest from that specific face. Now we're going to cover the iris. Okay, so I'm just going to make the pupil a little bit darker, and then we're going to shade the iris. We'll go over the shape of the iris before we start shading it, so you can get an understanding of how best to shade the iris so that it feels more realistic as well. The iris kind of recedes into the eyeball, and it's made up of a spongy texture, which is where you get all those lines going in towards the pupil. So I'm going to draw a quick diagram of an iris, like really close up from the side, so you can get a good understanding of how it looks. It's kind of like a saucer shape, and depending on the light angle, so ours being the top right facing down, the iris is going to reflect that similarly. So the bottom left of the iris will be highlighted and the top right will be in shadow. Another thing to note about the iris is the details in it. They're kind of like the surface of the iris, if you have to look really closely, is actually very bumpy and it's kind of like a spongy texture. And when you do detailed drawings of the eye, all those little seeming lines that go towards the pupil, those are sort of like the spongy edges, and you can capture that in a drawing if you pay real close attention and you add in. You don't have to draw each individual line, but you can get a very close approximation of that by sort of flowering out from the pupil. The pupil is also not a perfect circle. It has it's kind of got a hairy look where the lines are all coming out from the center and to the edge of the iris, so they're expanding and going away from the pupil, and then they reach the edge of the iris, and that's where there's that darkness or that sort of fuzzy border. As again I said, it's not a solid border, so you don't want to draw a perfect solid line. It's really good to use a blending stump there, or when you're drawing it, try to keep your pencil work light and to keep it looking unfocused. I also drew in a few veins for the really realistic eye, so you can add veins in. It's not necessary, but it does add to the realism. Another thing to pay attention to with the eyes, as I said, is that the ball of the eye, or the eyeball, is a sphere. So when you're shading it, there should be a light side and a dark side. I'm also going to do a side view of the eye so you can get an idea of the thickness of the eyelids, and also just for overall representational purposes. And then after that, we're going to do a detailed eye. Alright, here we're going to start with the detailed eye. I'll start with a few simple outlines, and then we'll drop into a time lapse, and then we'll come back at the end and talk a little bit there as well. So with the eyelashes, depending on the angle of the eye, you might not even see them that much. You'll see in my really realistic eye drawing that the eyelashes from the top of the eye are almost barely visible. It's near the edge of the outer edge of the eye and the bottom of the eye that you actually see them. They're also clustered together. You don't draw each individual eyelash. You'll draw them clustered together in like 3 or 4, and they kind of come together in a triangular shape, and that really gives a cool, realistic feel to your eye. Even if you're just drawing out of your imagination and you want to add eyelashes, that's a good trick to make your eye look more. Alright, that is our eye tutorial. I hope you found it useful, and I'll see you next time.